This is the podcast overview for week 12. We'll be covering chapter 11, self-regulation with physical activity and exercise. So this is the second chapter that deals with self-regulation, this time in terms of physical activity and exercise as a means of coping and self-regulating the stress that one might be feeling. So here is your to-do list for this week. Here are the objectives for chapter 11, and you can click here for an overview of each of these. Your lecture slides for chapter 11, and then just your discussion. You don't have a test this week. So the discussion is going to center around chapter 11 in Harrington. We're going to talk first about how does the lack of physical activity and depression contribute to each other. So how are those two connected? And again, you want to be referencing the research that's mentioned in Harrington. Why could engaging in regular physical activity have a protective effect against later developing depression? So sort of starting the trend of early physical activity is super important, especially in one's combating or prevention of depression. Number 2, how much physical activity do you get on a daily basis? If you currently have a low level of physical exercise, complete the insight exercise 11.1 on page 334 to identify what your exercise barriers are. And then you'd want to explain those. What would be the first step toward implementing some of these strategies discussed in the chapter for being more physically active? Second part of that is if your current level of physical exercise is moderate to high, what strategies do you employ to boost your activity levels? So you're in one of two camps. You're either in the low level of physical exercise, or you're in the moderate to high level. And so with each one of those, you're going to want to explain a little bit, talk a little bit about that in terms of how it's related to what's been discussed in the chapter. So identifying any barriers that exist to physical exercise, what are those for you? And then how could you change that? What strategies could you start to employ that are talked about in the chapter that might then help you be more physically active? And or if you're physically active right now and your exercise level is moderate to high, well, let us know, like, what strategies are you using? Maybe you are using some of the strategies that were talked about in the chapter. What are they? And how might those be helping you? And then lastly, what is it about engaging in regular physical activity that makes it an effective strategy for managing stress? I want you to use some examples from the chapter here. And in your opinion, how does it rank with other stress management strategies? So you guys have kind of been gathering a toolkit of different strategies so far for managing stress, and exercise definitely is one of those. It helps boost your hormones that are good for you, those endorphins that help in times of stress and anxiety. Physical activity definitely plays a role in that. So talk a little bit more about that and use some examples from the chapter in why physical activity is good and how it ranks kind of with some of the other strategies that were discussed. And how could it effectively be combined with other strategies to maximize its overall effect? So the great thing about stress reduction and strategies that we use to combat stress is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and there's not just one that you would use. There's so many different ones that you can combine to combat stress and also boost your physical health. So it might have to do with the time in life that you're at, the stage, your season that you're in. Certain strategies are going to work better than others. Some might be more possible than others. I would argue that physical activity across the lifespan is super important. in conjunction with some of those other strategies. So talk about some of those. And that wraps up your discussion. As you're working through the material this week, please let me know if any questions arise.